Hello. I have been aware for many years about the plans behind the scenes, the shadowy groups working towards world government. Groups such as the Bilderbergers and the Council for Relations. In fact, I've got a few DVDs that talk about this. There's Endgame by Alex Jones, and there's this one which isn't so well known, a talk by Dr. Michael Kaufman called Final Countdown UN World Government. And this would have been probably probably recorded in the 2000s, definitely over 10 years ago, but it's been going on for some time. But what really woke me up last year was the way the climate change hoax was being amped up. I found it very bizarre how Greta Thunberg could go on a strike in Sweden because of world leaders not taking enough action on the climate issue, and then as a result of going on strike, get invited to meet with world leaders around the world and invite to speak at the UN. I doubt if I went on strike as a 16-year-old about something like not wanting to have any homework or something like that. I doubt if I'd end up getting those invitations if it was me, but there you go. And also the emergence of Extinction Rebellion and Theresa May committing the UK to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, amending the 2008 Climate Change Act just before she left office. And the fact that last year it was no longer called climate change, it was now called a climate emergency. Well, most days when I walk outside, the vast majority of the time, the weather is what you'd expect, within the range you'd expect for the season. And there's no evidence of an emergency. And what I find very bizarre was how many young people in particular were going on these climate strikes when they're not suffering as a result of the climate. The air feels quite normal. The temperature is temperate. And in fact, no one can claim or prove that they are suffering because of carbon dioxide emissions, even if you're in a third world country and you are facing floods or droughts or whatever, and crop failures and all that sort of thing. Even if you would like a bit more rain or something, you cannot prove that the reason why the climate isn't doing what you want it to do is because people are putting too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That's just something people have been told. And herein lies the common problem, the invisible enemy. Have you noticed that all the wars we faced recently have been invisible? The war on terror, climate change, COVID. It's not something you can see. It's not something that's obvious, but we are told from the politicians, from the TV, that we have some invisible enemy and we have to radically change our behaviour to fight it. And what is very interesting about the climate change issue is this. If you were to ask one of these green activists, okay, so what is your end goal in terms of regulating the climate? What do you want to see happen by which you would know that we are no longer in a climate emergency, that it is over and we can keep our guard down? What is your goal in terms of how you want to see the climate change or not change, because they're trying to prevent climate change? If you ask such a question, you don't get any answer. It becomes obvious that it's just going to be ongoing. And it's interesting because the climate issue's been around for about 30 years now. And every year you hear the same news story coming up every few months about some new IPCC report, and the emergency is getting worse and worse and worse. We're not doing enough. Same old story, recycled, but just amped up time and time again. And yet, where is the proof? Where is the proof that carbon dioxide emissions are causing change to the climate? Even if you have some proof, how would you distinguish between what climate change has occurred due to carbon emissions and what may have occurred due to natural climatic variability? Because the climate does change. We had the Little Ice Age a few centuries ago, and before that we had the medieval warm period when it was as warm, if not warmer, than it is now. So there are natural climatic variations and interdecadal variations. Someone who was born in, say, the early 50s might say, well, the climate must be changing. I remember the winters were much colder when I was growing up. Well, yes, but they were milder in the 1930s. The 60s were a particularly cold decade, but that's just a natural climatic variation. And of course, there might be other factors that are affecting the climate as well. How about chemtrails, for instance? They might be affecting the climate on some level. So here's the thing. We are constantly told to believe there are invisible enemies, but those people telling us do not provide the proof. It is not acceptable for us to be told to change our behaviour in any way without that proof of claim and without knowing what the end goal is. What is the end goal to the climate crisis by which, when we reach that goal, there'll be no more crisis? What is the end goal to the COVID crisis? We've already seen that they've changed the goalpost from flattening the curve so the NHS doesn't get overwhelmed to dealing with cases. This is the problem. The deep state, who control our governments, they want us to believe there are invisible enemies, and they are using the mainstream media to promote this message that there's an invisible enemy out there and it's there to control you. It's there to further their own agendas and it's there to control you. We, the public, need to get smart to that. No more invisible enemies. And if you're going to tell us there's an invisible enemy out there, you show us the proof. And when you show us the proof, it is us, the public, that determine if that proof is sufficient, not you. Some pseudo-scientific paper by the likes of the IPCC or the World Health Organization will not cut it. And that is what the public need to realise and get smart to. As soon as the public en masse realise that whenever politicians declare we have an invisible enemy, whether it is to do with the climate or there is some new mutant variant of coronavirus, whatever it is, you need to know that is a psychological operation. That's a control mechanism. If they cannot prove it, if they cannot give robust proof and be clear about what the end goal is, then we should completely ignore it. No more invisible enemies. That is my message for the start of 2021. Thank you for watching.